Here we are today again with another interview, and this is the Online Ecotherapy Conference. I'm Ariana Candell, and I'm the founder of the Earth Body Institute. I'm here today with Amos Clifford. He is the founder of the Nature and Forest Therapy Guides, a phenomenally big organization worldwide. And why I invited him today is I just am incredibly impressed with the breadth of influence you've already had. That you're in 40 countries, you have 600 people trained, and this is just in the last like 4 or 5 years. And I also really love your mission that you want to uplift this work to be something that mental health people and medical doctors and many professions, education, refer to the forest therapy guides as a very esteemed, incredible kind of way to do healing work and connection work with the land and for well-being and more. So you have words better than I, but I just really appreciate your time with us today. And perhaps you can start out by letting us know, if people don't know it, what forest therapy is, kind of a little bit of sense of that.
Yeah, thanks, Ariana. I'm happy to be here today. And the name of the organization is Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. So forest therapy is a very simple practice in some ways, but like many simple practices, it has some deep roots under it. When we guide a forest therapy walk, like if I'm guiding a group of people, we'll typically go about 300 yards in 3 hours. And my aim during those 3 hours is to help people really slow down, become very present in their bodies and in their senses, and very present to the place where they're at, and to be as fully engaged with the natural world around them as we can help them be. And so one way to describe forest therapy, it's just a gentle walk in a natural area where we're paying attention to our senses, our sense of embodiment and the place. One thing that we like to say about it is it's much more about arriving here than it is about getting there. And also that the guides are not therapists. So when we train guides, we're really clear that we're training them to be guides, and the forest is the therapist. So there's a somewhat radical notion here, which is that we work actually in partnership with the more than human world, with the forest, and we treat it very much like it's a sentient partner. So we hold the story as guides that the world around us is alive, it's awake, it's sentient, it has wisdom, it has agency, it makes decisions, and it's responsive to humans in the environment, that humans belong. And in many ways, when we come back into the forest or into the more than human world, remembering that we belong and are welcomed there, there's a sense of connection that develops very rapidly. It's a very beautiful experience often.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to highlight the difference of going into the natural world to truly connect and be present and be in relationship is so different than so many people hike through, walk through, run through, play in, and you're wanting to really create that sense of presence and communication both ways. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we call it moving toward a kin-centric relationship with the more than human world. And you'll hear me use the term more than human world quite a bit. It's a term that I like quite a lot. It's been around for several decades. And one of the reasons I like to use it is because we're in a very deep trance around the word nature. And that trance is simply that when we hear or say the word nature, there's a part of us that experiences that as something outside and separate from who we are. And that is very inaccurate perception. We are not separate from nature. We're a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so by using the term the more than human world, what I'm hoping is accomplished by that is that we have a sense of context that we live within as a part of this surrounding, encompassing world that's very much alive.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that distinction. And I think that we'll be talking more about that in some of the other interviews. And it's a little tricky of how to shift that paradigm, right? Because even though a lot of us, believe and know we are natural, to to actually believe that we're like in the middle of the more than human world. We're not like have to go to it and create some separate experience.
Well, that's the power of the trance. We can say nature, we can tell ourselves intellectually with our minds, well, we're a part of that, but experientially, this sense of separation still remains very, very strong.
Yeah.
And every now and then we'll have these breakthrough moments where that sense of separation evaporates. And often people will characterize those as a highly significant spiritual experience, which I think is true. And I think another truth is actually it's just an ordinary experience of the real. Because what is real is that we are a part of all that is around us. And yeah, so even terms like, for example, with nature, there's a term we often use called natural resources. Well, just think about that. That positions everything that's not human as a resource for humans.
Yeah.
And if you're talking to most land use managers, particularly if they're rangers, who really love the land and really want to protect it, they'll talk about protecting and managing the resource. And whenever I hear that, I feel a little bit excuse me, I feel a little bit heartbroken. It's a little bit like saying I need to protect and manage, my family around me. And, there's something to that. I don't want to say that that's just, totally wrong, but it does feel incomplete.
Yeah, and it also creates that separation similar to the word nature in that, mainstream Western society tends to, want to use and take all those resources since, manifest destiny and probably before. And so it's dangerous, I think, to use the word resource in relationship to nature. So I think I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're back to more than human world is the term that we're using now. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I want to hear a lot more about other things that have to do with what you do at the Forest Therapy Association, but I wonder if you can just name a little bit of the science that goes with it, because I think that's one of the very powerful, more of a mental mindsets that will speak to people who don't quite know the more spiritual or the more sensual or, sentient experience of nature.
Right.
Yeah, and we have all different people that we're trying to, introduce this. Yeah.
Well, when I was considering what work to do with this part of my life, I was really looking carefully at a number of different options. And one of the things that lit me up about forest therapy was that there is a science, a growing body of science that gives evidence for its efficacy in a number of realms. And one is physiological, and then there's also more psychological, emotional efficacy. So the physiological results mostly look at the indicators of stress and how even a brief walk in the forest can reduce our stress levels. And when our stress levels are reduced, our body's natural capacity for wellness and self-healing is strengthened. So, like, for example, a common finding is that after a 3-hour slow walk in the forest, people's immune system is functioning better. And that can be measured through, for example, natural killer cell count. We just had a one of our guides, one of our trainers in Canada actually shared in the Facebook group yesterday something that one of her participants had sent her, and this was a woman who was affected by breast cancer and was undergoing, different kinds of treatments for that, and came on a forest therapy walk because she'd heard of this effect on the immune system. She went after the forest therapy walk, very soon after that, had her blood looked at, and her doctor said that her immune system, her natural killer cell count had tripled from that walk. And she started incorporating the forest therapy walks into, as a part of her treatment for cancer, and has reported that she's had a good recovery experience from that. And she credits the forest therapy as being a part of that. I don't think she would say, or I would say, or any of our guides would say, have cancer, just go do forest therapy, that'll take care of it.
Yeah, of course not.
But some of the researchers like Yoshifuma Miyazaki, who's at Chiba University in Japan, he'll say this is much more about creating bodies that don't get sick than it is about helping people get well. I think that it can be very helpful. One of the things that I've noticed for myself is that after I took up this practice, I tend to get sick less often, and I tend to recover more quickly when I do get sick. So I see that also. Then, so physiologically, that's just touching a little bit on it. Some of the findings, but almost all of the findings are looking at reductions in stress. So what happens with heart rate variability, what that improves, what happens with some of the stress-related hormones like cortisol and amylase, what happens with some of the positive kinds of hormones like DHEA, which increases, all of those things are looked at by many researchers, and the data all converge. They're pretty much in agreement. There are some criticisms of some of the research design, but what I'm looking at here personally on that is the convergence of data. Then on the more psychological area, people are more creative. They feel more energized, they feel more at peace, more relaxed. So that's when people are gathering data. One thing that I would say about the science is that what we find in the science is very much dependent on what we ask and how we ask it. Right. So I feel like I see things happening on forest therapy walks that are not being studied currently by any of the researchers. And we're in conversations with several researchers about changing this. But one of the things that we see very often is that people who do even a 3-hour guided walk will report back that it was transformative, resulting in specific changes in their lives, like sometimes making big decisions, which I think are decisions that they already knew inside they needed to make, but they needed to get out of their ordinary life, go into this kind of liminal space of being really in their body, in their senses, in their forest, where they're essentially encountering themselves, right? And they're having an encounter with themselves that allows them to hear their deeper truth, and that frees them up. And so, as far as I know, nobody's studying that. So that would be an example,
That's wonderful. I hope they do study that, because that it's such a particular experience that so many people have, and it would be great to have a lot of data. I just want to name one other piece that really struck me when I read the research, is that people's experience of anger goes down, hostility, violence, and their well-being goes up. And also that when I looked at these studies maybe 5 years ago, they had already been 10 years old. So this is a long standing research study in a body of work. So
there's a lot more, and we have a lot of it on our website. So if any viewers are interested in this, they can go to the website. That short URL is nftg.org. Just go there and you'll find tons of research.
Wonderful. Well, good. Well, we'll thank you for that, and we'll move on to. I would love to hear you describe the concept of the guide a little bit further, as opposed to the therapist. You kind of mentioned it a little earlier, but I thought there
Yeah.
was really a beautiful difference between a therapist is a little bit more directive and a guide is a little bit more invitational. But you have your word
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
Well, I think of these as archetypes
Mm-hmm.
that each have their own way of inhabiting our work. And so one of the really specific parts of being a guide is that a guide works in partnership with the more than human world.
Mm-hmm.
So my definition of guide is working in partnership with the more than human world. A guide accompanies and supports others on the journeys through which they find and manifest their medicine. So
Mm-hmm.
by medicine, what we're talking about are the unique and particular gifts that each person is born with. So when we train guides, I offer this story. I say, hold this story that we're each born out of the earth, carrying seeds of medicine that the earth knows is needed now. So who you are is needed now. You were born carrying 4 seeds of medicine, and they correspond. There's a whole teaching around how they correspond to the different directions. There's some medicine wheel kind of teachings in this. And the task, the proper task of education and mentoring and so on is to help each person discover what those 4 medicines are and to cultivate them in a balanced way. When they do that, they then are, their life is automatically aligned with what is intended for them from the beginning. And then as we inhabit our medicine in a balanced way, we live lives of power and beauty and service. And so the role of the guide is simply to support the journey through which people find that. And this journey necessarily involves the more than human world. One of the reasons it involves the more than human world is that in the human world, we've created a very strong system of trances that reinforce each other, that keep us often from seeing who we are and what the medicines are that we carry. So this is very well known in psychology. This is what Carl Jung called the individuation process. He particularly called out how liminal spaces, so spaces in between ordinary parts of life, are so important for activating the kind of creative imagination that it takes to really be able to move beyond the conditioning of culture, of family, and so on. And so the way the guide operates is we get people out into the more than human world in a liminal experience. If you come on a forced therapy walk, you're going to be in a liminal experience for 3 hours, right? It's going to definitely be outside of your ordinary way of experiencing time, of experiencing your body, of experiencing the world around you. And in that time, you may make some discovery. So the more than human world is full of mirrors. Everything you encounter, a tree, a stone, a river, a bird, may be exactly the mirror that you need to find something about yourself. So the archetype of the guide very specifically excludes the guide having some agenda for what someone should find. So we don't take people out, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes people have transformative experiences. I don't carry that agenda for them. Sometimes people experience joy or awe. I don't carry that agenda for them. Sometimes they experience grief and deep sorrow. Not my agenda. That's between them and the forest. As a guide, working within the guide archetype, my role is to open the doors so that the more than human world can come in and do its work. If I've decided in advance what that work should be, I'm stepping on my partner. My partner's the more than human world. I've got to make room for it to do its work. It's very deep relational work. with the
Mhm.
people that we're taking.
Mhm.
So there's no diagnosing, there's no treatment plan, there's no assessing, that kind of thing that you would find more in the archetype of the psychotherapist, which I think may be an archetype of the healer. I'm not really sure about that. And I should just mention I worked as a psychotherapist for a dozen years or so, so I have some understanding of this.
Mhm. Mhm. I really appreciate how describe the difference and the immense trust that your guides need to have in the more than human world.
Yeah.
And also, so I imagine, similar to my ecotherapy training is that, that personal relationship with, with the mirroring of all the different beings outdoors, and with that ongoing cultivation of a trust in one's own transformative experiences is going to help your guides to be really powerful guides. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a major part of the training.
Mhm.
The training is 6 months long. It starts with a week-long intensive, and
Mhm.
that first week-long intensive is really a dive into this connection, but the
Mhm.
6 months cultivates it over time. So we give them a lot of very specific assignments during their practicum
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
help them to deepen their relationship. And
Mhm.
almost every guide that we've trained will come back and say that it was the most powerful experience they've had in their lives, and completely transformative. So yeah, so
Mhm.
a lot of it for me as a guide is staying out of the way. But I realize that in order for people to connect with nature in this really deep way, guiding is important. And not only that, working with other people is important. So
Mhm.
sometimes there's this idea, well, I'll just go out into nature, by myself, and I'll be able to connect. But we're a very social species. We need each other.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
on a guided walk, one of the things that we have built in is this little, what we call it, light touch council. We use the council format of being in a circle and passing a talking piece. And we will do this probably 4 times during a guided walk, usually offering the question, simply, what are you noticing? And by doing that, by listening to each other and sharing what we're noticing, we support each other in
Mhm.
our noticing. And we also witness each other in noticing things that might be considered unusual or a little bit out there because they may be outside of the cultural trance.
Mhm.
So someone may share in a circle, they may say, well, I was talking to that tree and it said to me, right?
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
if you go back to the office and you try to share that back at the
Mhm.
office, you're probably going to get shut down pretty quickly, right?
Mhm.
But you're
Mhm.
in the course of a guided walk, you're being listened to by other
Mhm.
people who are having similar enough experiences that they get it, they get what's going on. And so that process of having the unusual experiences that really support individuation and well-being is supported in groups. So
I
that's just really a key part here.
I want to highlight that again as well, that I feel like the difference that happens when people get validated from others having the same kind of experience or similar experiences of the power of the communication with the natural world, um, is is so important, because we just don't get that almost anywhere else. And so the community that is created, sounds like with your folks and with our folks, is essential, because
Yeah,
it's a different worldview, and it needs to be repeated and integrated along the way.
yeah.
Sounds like how you're doing that. Yeah.
It's one of the mottos we use is nature connection and culture repair arise together. So
Mhm.
we can't really connect to nature without repairing culture. And this experience of counsel during a group process is a short-term experience of some elements of an intact culture,
Mhm.
namely
Mhm.
simply being listened to without someone trying to fix you, which is
Mhm.
often unusual. I want to just come back and just mention regarding the archetypes. In
Mhm.
my view, the archetype of guide appropriately works with at least 2 other archetypes, and one of those is the one that the psychotherapist inhabits. And if we have people come on guided walks who are not firmly rooted in their capacity to function in the more than human, or excuse me, in the human built world, um, the guided walk could be disorienting for them. They could go, instead of it having a liminal experience, it can become what's called liminoid, meaning it extends too long and doesn't give them a home to come back to, in a sense, right? So I think often for people on their journey, having a psychotherapist, a competent psychotherapist who's really helping them understand how to function well in the world is really important. Then we get them out of the human world into the more than human world for liminal experience, where they have another encounter. Once people find a medicine, or they discover who they are. So one way to say this is you get a vision, you get inspired, and you get a clarity on, this is what I should be doing with my life. You come back out of that liminal space, back into, we usually call it the tamed world. That's the world of the consensus trance of culture. Now what's needed is the archetype of mentor, because what the mentor can do is help them stay connected to their vision, while all the forces of the tamed world, all the forces of trance are trying to conspiring in a way so that we forget what our vision is. And so I see my role as a guide as being a part of a team, you know, who have been your healers, your therapists, the people who have really helped you get solid in your work. And once you get your vision, who's going to help you stay connected to that vision in a way that you can really manifest it and go through the struggle? Because I tell you what, you know, I've vision fasted several times. And I can tell you this, I've vision fasted with a lot of people. It's the easy part is to go out and get your vision. I mean, it takes a big commitment. It's a lot of work. And I don't want to say, you know, by saying easy, I don't want to downplay the significance of it. But where it fails for most people is when they come back into their ordinary lives. And for a few months, they're fired up with their vision, with what they got, with what they're supposed to do. And then slowly the trance descends. And we're right back into the same thing over and over again. And this is where people could encounter really a deep kind of depression, hopelessness, you know, that kind of thing.
So thanks for that piece, because the integration piece is sometimes not emphasized enough, and it takes a real lot to continue a more earth-centered, earth-connected way of offering your gifts to the world and keep going, because it is so it can be so battering, and it's just not seen in very many places. So well,
it's another example. We need each other.
I want to ask, well, there's a couple things I wanted to check out. Well, one is, you know, I guess I want to hear in your words anything more about like how you're bringing this into the day-to-day world that is created, that isn't necessarily considering the more than human world as its partner. So, you know, mental health field, or you know, teaching fields, or medical field. How do you see your people going into that? What's your vision for, you know, influencing that? Because you have a very strong vision. You want to have this be a part of that.
You know, I often get asked by people, you know, what advice can I give them about how to do this work with teachers, or with vets with PTSD, or with survivors of breast cancer? And my answer is, I train guides, and the guides work that out with their people, right? So now we have over 600 guides that we've trained, and they're working with all kinds of populations and sharing that dramatically. We've trained, I think, 6 or 7 physicians now, quite a few nurses. We just had a cohort finish their week-long intensive in Ohio. One of the guides who trained there is a CEO at Kaiser. Do you think that'll make a difference? You know, what I feel is my job as a trainer is I'm throwing pebbles into the pond. I can't control the ripples once they're out there. But I can tell you this, with 600 guides out there, there's probably not that many days where there's not someone somewhere in the world
Mhm.
guiding a forest therapy walk using this very powerful method that we
Mhm.
developed. So
Mhm.
the method we call the standard sequence, and it's just, you know, what I did once I started this, once I committed to this, I started weaving together the different strands of my life. So I've been a
Mhm.
wilderness guide for quite a long time, a psychotherapist, decades of Zen practice. I'm founder of Sky Creek Dharma Center up in Chico, done a lot of consulting, you know, educational design, curriculum, and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. And I just started guiding people.
Mhm.
And I experimented like crazy. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
and what I found was that over the course of about 100 walks, I found that there was a specific
Mhm.
sequence of doing things
Mhm.
that was
Mhm.
very reliable.
Mhm.
And it has this characteristic. It begins, ends the same. It uses, it's kind of built around a fundamental story, which is the way of the guide story. So this is one of the core teachings, is the way of the guide. And it has a big section in the middle called It Depends. And It Depends is where the guide decides what to do based on the group and the guide's interest and the situation and the weather and the land. And
Mhm.
it all works together, right? That's really where the guide has to learn this sense of deep partnership and connection and
Mhm.
listening with their whole body. We say, when we say listen, we're talking, it's a whole body experience. To listen or to gaze, it's with the
Mhm.
whole body. And so one of the characteristics of the standard sequence is that it provides a framework
Mhm.
within which there's a lot of flexibility.
Mhm.
So part of my vision for this framework is that it would be culturally neutral.
Mhm.
So the framework and the way we teach this is you're not going to find any Native American overlays in it or Buddhistic stuff or any of that. You know, all it is a kind of a bare bones framework that people can then use and adapt in whatever
Mhm.
culture they're in. And
Mhm.
this has gone
Mhm.
into a lot of cultures and it's worked
Mhm.
very well there. So I
Mhm.
think that this is actually one of the
Mhm.
reasons why this has been so successful
Mhm.
is because of the emphasis on a cultural neutrality,
Mhm.
and also on in the way of the guide, the emphasis on not going out with an agenda for the people, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So, for example, you know, we'll often have people say, well, what you're doing is mindfulness in nature. And say, no, I don't think it is.
Mhm.
You know, we don't have an agenda for people to be mindful.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know, not
Mhm.
only that, we're not trained as mindfulness instructors, you know.
Mhm.
Uh,
There's some
what
qualities of that, but I like that again, that you give a lot of freedom to the, you know, the gifts of your guide and the intuition of your guide and the sense of your guide, so that there is a real going with what's there in that middle section, but you
yeah,
have enough framework so people feel held. That's
it's another one of my principles as a trainer is I'm not here to train you to guide the way I guide. I'm here to train you to guide the way you guide,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So you're
And I'm
practicing what you're wanting them to
yeah,
do with their
and,
people.
and
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a framework,
Hmm.
standard sequence, and a story, the way of the guide, and
Hmm.
some skills like the language of invitation. That's one of the
Hmm.
things we really focus on.
Hmm.
And 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 then I'm going to invite you to see if those empower you to fully step into your medicine as a
Hmm.
guide.
Hmm. Hmm. Great. Yeah, we are starting to run out of time, so I am wondering if you can say a little bit about your book and
Yeah, yeah,
any other kind of upcoming juicy programs you want to talk about.
yeah. So thank you for that. I have a book that came out in May called Your Guide to Forest Bathing. And it's written to support people in the practice, even if they don't have a guide. So it gives a fairly comprehensive description of some of the things that we would do in the standard sequence. In the book, the standard sequence is referred to as the optimal flow
Mhm.
publishing decision, but it's the same thing. And there's quite a few of the invitations that we use in there. So we don't do assignments, we give invitations. And one of the reasons we call it an invitation is because if you find yourself trying really hard to do it right, we say
Mhm.
just let it go, or adapt it in the moments into something that actually works for you. And every now and then we'll have people really get into the spirit of invitation, and they'll just wander off during the walk and do their own thing, which is great.
Yeah.
So there's that. We have, I believe, 16 trainings scheduled for 2019. They're not posted on the website yet. We have a training coming up in a couple of weeks here in the San Francisco Bay Area that I think we still have 3 or 4 openings in. Right now, I believe yesterday, our first ever training in a language other than English started. So in the Pyrenees in Spain, we're having a training being offered completely in Spanish language. So we'll be having trainings in many countries next year. If any of your listeners are interested in New Zealand, there's one coming up in a few weeks there that still has a few openings. In addition to that, one of the other guides in the organization and I are working together to do a series of 4-day immersions. We just did one up at Hollyhock on Cortez Island in British Columbia called the Council of Waters and Trees. And each of the 4-day immersions explores in much greater depth one or more aspects of what we covered during the week-long immersion.
Kind of like advanced training in a certain way.
Yeah. It is, but you don't have to have had the guide training to do this. So the one we just had, for example, we had, I think, 10 guides and 10 people who were not guides, and it was great for everybody. So, but we do envision that having a series of 10 or 12 of these immersions, that if our guides complete those, and that will be like, a deeper level of qualification as a guide. So we're trying to support the ongoing learning of the guides, as well as, for me, these immersions, they're always unique, and I learned so much from them, and it's really where my heart is at right now, is doing these immersions. We have great, competent training teams now in different parts of the world, and more people coming along on the trainer's path. I think we have 21 people now who are either trainers or in their apprentice phase, which means they're about to be initiated as trainers. So, and many countries and languages.
I think your reach is amazing, and it sounds like you've got it set up to just keep growing like those ripples you talked about. And I'm happy for you that you're taking it to a different level. The immersions are a different kind of satisfaction than kind of creating the foundational program. And I'm imagining they're really deep and really rich and all that. So any last words before we say goodbye for now? And I know that everyone can go to your site to read a lot more of what's happening and find out about the trainings pretty soon when those get up there. Anything else?
Well, I know that people are busy and we have a lot to do with our lives and a lot of choices that we can make. And anyone who's sat through this interview, I just really want to express my appreciation and gratitude. I always feel very honored when someone gives the time to listen in this way, and may it serve.